The Linton's house looked like a magazine spread that evening, golden lights spilling through tall windows, the soft hum of jazz floating from hidden speakers, and the scent of rosemary and wine drifting through the air. Mara had spent the entire day preparing, her movements sharp but deliberate, as if each slice of lemon or fold of a napkin could hold her marriage together a little longer. David arrived home just before sunset, carrying an expensive bouquet of white orchids. 10 years, he said, handing them to her with a perfectly rehearsed smile. She nodded, her lips curving slightly. 10 years, she echoed, though her eyes told a different story. Guests began to arrive, colleagues from the hospital, a few neighbors, and an old friend from Mara's college days. The night unfolded with laughter and polished charm. David, ever the perfect host, charmed everyone. He toasted to a decade of love and perseverance, his arm resting lightly on Mara's shoulder. Yet when the crowd looked away, his grip lingered just a second too long, a quiet reminder of control. Mara laughed when she was supposed to, smiled when required, but her eyes flickered often toward the clock. Every sound seemed amplified, the clinking of glasses, the buzz of conversation, the soft rattle of her bracelet as her hand trembled against the table. "Are you all right?" whispered her friend Lila, leaning close. Mara nodded quickly. "Just tired," she said, forcing a bright smile. "Long day?" By midnight, the guests began to leave. The last car pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind silence, the kind that hums with something unspoken. David closed the door, his expression unreadable. "Successful evening," he said. Mara began clearing plates. "If success means pretending," she murmured. He turned sharply. "What did you say?" "Nothing," she said too quickly. The tension between them was no longer hidden by polite smiles. As she wiped the table, her phone buzzed. She reached for it, but David was faster. His hand landed on the device, eyes narrowing. "Who's texting you at this hour?" "It's Lila," Mara lied, her voice steady but her heart racing. He looked at her for a long moment, then tossed the phone back. "You've become secretive lately," he said softly, almost tenderly. And that frightened her more than if he'd yelled. Outside, a storm began to form. Wind howled through the trees, shaking the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Inside, the mansion felt colder. At 1:47 a.m., a neighbor would later recall hearing something. A muffled scream, a crash, and the sound of shattering glass. When police arrived at dawn, the house was in chaos. A wine glass lay shattered across the marble floor. The dinner table, still set for two, glimmered under dim light. David was found unconscious in the living room, blood on his temple. The faint smell of whiskey in the air. Upstairs, a trail of red led to the open balcony door, and beyond it, nothing but the night wind. Mara Linton was gone. The media would call it the anniversary mystery, but for Detective Irene Shaw, who would take the case the next morning, it was something far darker. Because what she saw in that house wasn't the scene of a crime. It was the echo of a marriage that had already been dying long before the blood appeared. Rain drizzled over the Silver Pine Bridge, soft and unrelenting. The air smelled of rust, wet concrete, and something faintly metallic. The kind of scent that lingers after something irreversible has happened. Detective Irene Shaw stood by the railing, her coat soaked through, eyes tracing the glimmer of flashing lights reflecting off the water below. Mara Linton's silver BMW was parked perfectly in line with the barrier. Inside, the driver's seat was pushed back, as if someone taller than Mara had been there last. Her purse sat neatly on the passenger seat. Wallet, lipstick, keys, and a folded note that read only 2 words. "I'm sorry, but it didn't feel right. Shoes." "Purse note? Looks like a jump," said Officer Trent, his voice muffled under the rain. "Maybe," Irene replied, crouching to study the faint red smear on the driver's door. "But tell me something, Trent. Since when do suicides tidy up before dying?" She turned toward the edge of the bridge, where Mara's black heels stood side by side almost ceremoniously. The river below churned like liquid glass, swallowing every reflection except the red and blue of police lights. Back at the Linton house, David sat wrapped in a blanket, a bruise forming on his neck, his eyes red-rimmed. "I don't remember," he whispered to Irene when she questioned him. "We argued. I drank too much. I went to sleep. And when I woke up, she was gone. Irene studied him carefully. You didn't notice the balcony door open? The blood on the floor? His jaw tightened. I thought maybe she'd cut herself on glass. You're making it sound like I hurt her. I'm just asking questions, she said evenly, though her gaze lingered on his hands. A faint scratch on one wrist, the kind that comes from struggle, not sorrow. Downstairs, the evidence team worked in silence. On the couch, they found a blood-stained scarf, silk torn slightly at the edge. The same color Mara had worn at dinner. The pattern matched the faint imprint around David's throat. Strangulation attempt, Irene muttered under her breath. But whose hands were on who? The tabloids exploded the next morning. Hollywood psychiatrist's wife missing, suicide or scandal. Photos of the glamorous couple filled every screen, painting them as the perfect marriage destroyed by mystery. To the public, David was a grieving husband. To Irene, he was a man playing a role he'd rehearsed too well. 3 days later, divers searched the river. Nothing. No body, no fabric, no trace. Just empty water and endless speculation. Irene visited the Linton residence again, this time unannounced. The house smelled of lemon polish and old perfume. A wine stain still marked the floor, now scrubbed into a faint pink shadow. In the bedroom, a second phone sat hidden in a drawer. A burner, filled with unsent messages. He knows. I think he's following me. If something happens, it won't be an accident. Irene felt her stomach twist. This wasn't suicide. It was a countdown. That night, she stood again at the bridge, watching the water drag shadows beneath its surface. Where are you, Mara? She whispered to the wind. And who were you trying to escape from? Somewhere behind her, headlights flared briefly, then vanished. She turned, but there was nothing. Just darkness swallowing the road. By morning, the story had taken on a new name across the news cycle. The Vanishing Wife. But Irene wasn't convinced Mara was dead. The scarf, the bruises, the messages, they all pointed to one truth she couldn't yet prove. Someone wanted this woman erased, and the man claiming to mourn her might be the one who made her disappear. David Linton sat before the cameras, the light catching the faint tremor in his hands. His voice was soft, deliberate, rehearsed. The voice of a man playing grief for the world to see. Mara was my everything, he said to the interviewer, pausing just long enough for sympathy to settle in. She had a light, one that everyone noticed. I just wish I could have protected her. The news anchor nodded solemnly, the camera panning to his face. A portrait of heartbreak. America believed him. Detective Irene Shaw didn't. From her office, she replayed the interview 3 times. The first time she listened to his words, the second to his tone, the third to what he didn't say. No mention of the argument that night. No mention of the scarf or the bruises on his neck. Just a carefully crafted image of a man too noble to suspect. He's performing, Irene muttered. Clicking pause. Behind David's gentle demeanor was precision. The same precision that had made him one of the top reconstructive surgeons in Los Angeles. He understood anatomy, pressure points, and control. Every movement, every breath seemed calibrated. To the public, he was the perfect husband. To those who knew Mara, he was something else entirely. When Irene began interviewing Mara's friends, a different story emerged. He never raised his voice, said one friend, voice trembling. That's what made it worse. He'd just disappear, stop talking to her for days. She'd beg for forgiveness and not even know what she'd done. Another friend added quietly, Mara used to joke that she had to earn his kindness back, like affection was a privilege. They described the way Mara began fading, skipping dinners, withdrawing from social events, wearing long sleeves even in summer. Her laughter, once infectious, became practiced. Her phone stayed silent more often. Then came the whispers of silent punishments. No shouting, no slamming doors, just long silences that made the house unbearable. When Mara confided in her sister, she said one thing that now haunted everyone who heard it. He never hurts me. He just makes me wish I didn't exist. The words played over and over in Irene's mind. This wasn't impulsive rage. This was crafted cruelty. She visited the Linton mansion again. David greeted her with polite restraint, as if she were an unwelcome guest at his grieving ritual. You're wasting your time, detective, he said, pouring tea as though they were old friends. Mara was fragile. You know how emotional women can be. Irene watched him carefully. His tone was calm, dismissive, but his eyes, those sharp clinical eyes, betrayed something colder. Maybe, she said, standing. But fragile things don't vanish without leaving a trace. And you seem remarkably composed for a man who's lost the love of his life. He smiled faintly. I've had to learn to control myself, detective. It's what makes me good at what I do. Outside, Irene paused at the gate, feeling a chill despite the sun. The air around the mansion felt heavy, like grief trying to smother the truth. That night, she opened Mara's recovered phone records. One number appeared repeatedly in the final weeks before her disappearance, an unregistered prepaid line. The last message read, "I have proof. He'll never hurt me again." Irene stared at the screen. Proof of what? Somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows of David's perfect life, lay the answer Mara had tried to leave behind. Detective Irene Shaw had spent weeks peeling back the layers of the Lintons' marriage. But now, finally, something real had surfaced. A call from a quiet voice changed everything. "This is Dr. Harper," the woman said. "I think I have something you'll want to hear. About Mara Linton." Hours later, Irene sat inside a modest office overlooking the ocean, a sharp contrast to the glass and gold perfection of the Linton mansion. The therapist's room smelled faintly of lavender and paper. On the desk sat a small recorder, its black surface polished smooth from use. "Mara came here for 6 months," Dr. Harper said softly. She was frightened, but not of violence. Of vanishing, of becoming no one. She slid the recorder across the desk. She wanted everything documented. She said if anything happened to her, these tapes would tell the truth. Irene pressed play. At first, the voice on the tape was delicate, almost hesitant. "I keep trying to make him happy. He says he loves me. But every time I smile wrong, he corrects me." A pause. Then a shaky breath. "I don't think he wants a wife. He wants a reflection." The words echoed through the room, carrying a quiet despair. Irene closed her eyes and listened. Not as a detective, but as a woman hearing another woman drown beneath politeness. In the next session, Mara's tone hardened. "I tried to tell him I needed space." He laughed. "Said I could have all the space I wanted, as long as it was next to him." Dr. Harper's voice, calm and controlled, asked, "Does he ever get angry?" "Only when I talk about leaving," Mara whispered. "Then it's like he becomes someone else. He tells me I'm confused, that I'm fragile, that no one would love me the way he does. And for a moment, I almost believe him." Irene stopped the recording. The air in the office felt thick. "This isn't just control," she said quietly. "It's reprogramming," Dr. Harper nodded. "She once told me he could make her doubt the color of the sky if he wanted to." Irene knew the pattern well. Psychological abuse so meticulous it left no bruises, only self-doubt. Victims often withdrew, convinced their suffering was love in disguise. But there was something else. At the end of the final tape, Mara's voice trembled with new determination. "He thinks I'm too weak to leave. But he doesn't know. I've been recording everything. Someday someone will hear this. And when they do, he'll finally lose control." The session ended abruptly with a sharp knock. Then silence. Dr. Harper leaned back, her eyes dark with memory. "That was the last time I saw her." The next week, she missed her appointment. Then the news broke. Outside, the evening sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised shades of red and gold. Irene stood by the window, watching the light fade. She was building a case, she murmured. One she never got to finish. She asked for copies of every tape, then paused at the door. Did she ever mention keeping them anywhere else? The therapist hesitated. Once, she said she had a backup, hidden in something that belonged to him, but she didn't say where. That night, back in her car, Irene replayed Mara's final words again and again. He'll finally lose control. Her mind circled the clue like a hunter tracing footprints. A backup hidden in something that belonged to David. A faint smile crossed her face. You left me a trail, didn't you, Mara? She started the engine, the recorder still humming softly in the passenger seat. A ghost whispering from the past. The discovery came by accident. Detective Irene Shaw was supervising a final sweep of the Linton bedroom when an officer called out, "Ma'am, you'll want to see this." He knelt beside the dresser. holding a small, dust-covered object wrapped in silk. A burner phone. Cheap and untraceable. It shouldn't have been there. The Lintons had matching top-of-the-line devices, synchronized calendars, and fingerprint locks. This phone didn't belong to their world. Irene turned it over in her hands. It was cold, as though it hadn't been touched in days. When she powered it on, a single message blinked on the cracked screen. Tomorrow. 9 p.m., the lake house. It's time. The message was sent the night Mara disappeared. A dozen other texts followed, all from an unsaved number. Careful, cautious conversations. Most were one-sided. He's watching again. I can't breathe in that house. If anything happens to me, find the cabin. Irene's pulse quickened. Who was she talking to? The tech analyst beside her replied, no contact name, no cloud backup. Whoever it was, she trusted them enough to plan her escape. They traced the signal, a series of pings leading directly to the Silver Lake region, 20 miles outside the city, the same area where David's family kept a private retreat. When Irene confronted him later, David's expression was one of offended disbelief. A burner phone? You think my wife was hiding one from me? He forced a laugh. Mara didn't even know how to delete a text. She learned, Irene said evenly. He straightened his cufflinks, a habitual gesture she'd come to recognize as his tell. If she went to that cabin, I wasn't with her. I've been cooperating fully. Irene slid a printed map across the table. A thin red line traced his car's movements that night. Your GPS says otherwise. You passed the Silver Lake Road at 9:14 p.m. twice. David blinked. Then it's wrong. Sheens make mistakes. Not as many as people do. Silence filled the interrogation room. He smiled then, a weary, practiced smile. The same one that had charmed audiences, investors, and interviewers alike. Detective, my wife was unstable. She believed people were watching her. Maybe she ran off to make me pay. Irene leaned forward, lowering her voice. Or maybe she finally stopped running. Back in her office, she studied the phone again. The final text, sent just before 9 p.m., read simply, he's here. The timestamp matched the moment neighbors reported screams from the Linton mansion. It wasn't just an escape plan. It was a timeline. The room grew darker as evening fell. Irene scrolled through the last few images stored on the device. One photograph stopped her cold, a reflection in a mirror, Mara's hand holding the phone. And behind her, a blurred figure standing in the doorway. She enlarged the image. The shape was unmistakable, tall, suited, motionless, watching. Her phone buzzed. The forensics team had news. Detective, we found tire impressions near the Silver Lake cabin. Matches David's car model. Irene's gaze lingered on the photo one last time before she shut off the screen. Then that's where we go next. She placed the phone in an evidence bag, sealing it carefully, as though sealing away a final whisper from a woman who had tried and failed to escape. The Silver Lake cabin stood at the edge of a still, dark water, a lonely structure swallowed by fog. Detective Irene Shaw's boots sank slightly in the damp earth as she approached, the charred scent of old smoke still lingering in the air. By the time investigators arrived, the cabin was little more than a blackened skeleton. Its roof had collapsed inward, beams twisted like ribs around an empty heart. But Irene knew one thing for certain. The fire hadn't been an accident. Inside the police command tent, a technician played newly recovered security footage from a lakeside camera. The image was grainy but clear enough to make Irene's pulse quicken. At 8:57 p.m., a woman stepped into frame. Tall, slender, wearing a dark coat and scarf. Her movements were cautious but purposeful. Even through the static, Irene recognized her posture from family videos and photographs. Mara Linton, she whispered. A second figure appeared just minutes later, a man in a hooded jacket. His face was obscured, his stride deliberate. He followed the same path toward the cabin. Moments later, the screen went white with glare, the reflection of sudden light from inside the cabin. Play that again, Irene said. The tech rewound the footage. They slowed it down frame by frame. When the woman turned toward the camera for just a moment, Irene caught a faint glint, something metallic on her wrist. Zoom in, it was a bracelet, delicate and silver, with a small blue charm shaped like a teardrop. Mara wore it in every photo. Irene leaned back, eyes narrowing. Then she made it here. She wasn't alone. The next morning, neighbors had seen smoke rising from the woods. By the time firefighters reached the site, it was too late. The entire cabin was engulfed. Now all that remained were ashes and a mystery. The forensics team sifted through the wreckage carefully, every movement slow and deliberate. Burned timber, warped glass, and melted metal told fragments of a violent story. Over here, someone called. Irene hurried over. Lying half-buried near the shore was a small blackened object, twisted by heat but still recognizable. The blue teardrop charm glinted weakly beneath a coating of soot. "The bracelet," she said quietly. The tech nodded. "And the location, a few meters from the main structure. Looks like she tried to run." Irene's jaw tightened. But did she make it? Back at headquarters, analysts reconstructed the sequence of events. Fire accelerant traces were found in multiple spots, meaning it had been set intentionally. But something else was off. The cabin's door lock had been smashed from the inside. Irene stared at the report. She barricaded herself in, she murmured. Who was she so afraid of? Later that evening, she replayed the footage again, searching for what she might have missed. Just before the flare of light, the man in the hood turned slightly toward the camera. A faint reflection caught in his eyes, sharp, intelligent, calculating. The resolution wasn't clear enough for facial ID, but Irene recognized the posture, the confident, upright stance of someone used to control. "David," she said under her breath. She printed the still frame and pinned it to the evidence board beside Mara's photos, the burned bracelet, and the GPS data. Threads of red string connected them like veins in a body, yet something about the bracelet bothered her. The engraving on the clasp, visible even through the soot, didn't match Mara's initials. It read DL, not hers, Irene whispered. His. Had Mara taken it from him before running? Or had he left it behind as a message? The line between victim and perpetrator blurred again, distorted by fire and fear. As Irene stared at the board, one truth burned brighter than the rest. Someone had wanted Mara to disappear completely. But fire only hides evidence for so long. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake, distant but moving closer. The next morning, a call came from the coroner's office. A partial human jawbone had been recovered from the ashes. Irene closed her eyes. "Tag it," she said, "and get me a DNA match." She looked once more at the haunting photo of the hooded man and whispered to herself, "Let's see if the fire can still tell the truth." Detective Irene Shaw had seen plenty of mistresses before, fragile, defensive, or manipulative. But Elena Cross didn't fit any of those molds. She sat in the interview room, back straight, eyes rimmed red but unflinching. Her hands trembled only when she reached for the glass of water. Elena was 28, bright, ambitious, and, until recently, David Linton's research assistant at the hospital. She had volunteered to come in, insisting there were things the police needed to know. Irene studied her quietly. "You understand that withholding information in a homicide investigation can be considered obstruction?" Elena nodded. "Yes, that's why I'm here now. I should have come earlier." The tape recorder clicked on. The air between them grew taut. It started after one of his conferences. Elena began softly. He said his marriage was over, that Mara had changed, that she didn't understand him anymore. "I believed him," her voice faltered. "I shouldn't have." Irene leaned forward. "You were having an affair?" "Yes, but it wasn't what you think." Elena's fingers tightened around her glass. "He wasn't cruel, not at first. He was charming, protective. I thought he loved me." A pause. "And then?" Elena exhaled shakily. "Then he became someone else. Controlling, paranoid. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, check my phone, ask who I talked to. He said he just needed to make sure no one was lying to him again." "Again?" Irene echoed. Elena nodded. "He said Mara lied to him about everything, that she'd tried to destroy his career. But there was something in his tone, like he hated her and loved her in the same breath." Irene scribbled notes, the pen scratching like static. "When did you last see him?" "The night before the fire." Elena's admission hung in the air like smoke. "He came to my apartment after work," she continued. "He looked off, sweating, distracted. He kept saying he had to fix things, that everything would be over soon." I asked what he meant, but he just said, "Mara will never leave me again." The words replayed in Irene's mind like an echo. Cold, possessive, final. Did he tell you where he was going? No, Elena whispered. But he took his car keys. And when he left, he kissed me and said, "You'll understand tomorrow." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed distant. Irene closed her notebook slowly. You realize that statement places him near Silver Lake the night of the fire. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. I didn't know, Detective. I swear I didn't. He told me she was already gone, that she'd ended things. I thought he meant divorce. Irene's voice softened. Did he ever mention the cabin? Elena shook her head. No, but once he showed me a photo, a lake at sunset. Said it was their place. He looked at it like it was sacred. Would you recognize it again if you saw it? Yes. Irene slid a photograph across the table, a still image from the burned cabin site. The reflection of the water glimmered faintly behind blackened wood. Elena's lips parted, her face draining of color. That's it, she whispered. That's the photo. Her confession didn't just open a new lead, it shattered the illusion of David's innocence. The story of a grieving husband was unraveling, thread by thread, revealing a man whose love had curdled into control. As Irene gathered her files, Elena reached out, desperate. Detective Shaw, do you think he killed her? Irene hesitated. I think he wanted her to belong to him, she said quietly. And sometimes that kind of wanting ends in fire. When the interview ended, Elena remained seated, staring at her reflection in the mirrored glass, a woman who had loved a monster she helped create. Outside, Irene called her team. Pull David Linton's phone records again. I want every ping between 7 p.m. and midnight the night of the fire, and cross-check for Elena Cross's number. As she ended the call, her phone buzzed. The coroner's office. Irene, the voice said. We've got the DNA results from the jawbone. Her breath caught, and a pause long enough to make her heart pound. It's not Mara Linton. The line went dead. Irene stood frozen. The night wind rattling through the station window, her mind already racing toward what that meant. If the remains weren't Mara's, then someone else had died in that fire. Detective Irene Shaw had long learned that lies decay faster than bodies. Sooner or later they rot from the inside out, and all that's left is evidence. The morning after the coroner's call, Irene sat in the dim glow of the precinct's evidence room, her fingers drumming against the cold steel of a coffee cup. The DNA report still sat open on her desk. The burned remains from the cabin weren't Mara Linton's. Whoever had died in that fire was someone else. Entirely, the revelation had split the case, wide open, and made David Linton's role impossible to ignore. When the tech team wheeled in a hard drive, Irene barely looked up. What's this? Surveillance pull from the Silver Lake area, the technician said. You asked for traffic cams within a 5-mile radius of the cabin. We also found something at a gas station. Time-stamped the night Mara disappeared. Her pulse quickened. Show me. The monitor flickered to life. Grainy footage filled the screen. A quiet rural gas station, neon buzzing faintly in the darkness. A silver BMW pulled up to pump 3. Irene recognized the license plate immediately. David Linton's car. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m., precisely 2 hours after Mara's last confirmed sighting. She leaned forward. The video's perspective caught the car's passenger side, and for a split second, Irene's breath caught. The front seat was covered with a beige blanket, draped awkwardly as though concealing something bulky underneath. Then, a faint movement, barely perceptible but there. Shift, a tremor. Something, or someone, beneath that fabric. Freeze it, she said sharply. The technician rewound and paused at the exact frame. Irene squinted at the pixels, her hand instinctively covering her mouth. There, near the edge of the blanket, was a sliver of pale skin. Enhance, she whispered. The footage sharpened just enough to reveal a wrist. Delicate. Unmoving, but unmistakably human. Her stomach twisted. David stepped out of the driver's side next, wearing a hoodie and surgical gloves. He filled the tank, never looking up, movements efficient and deliberate. Then he returned to the car, adjusted the blanket slightly, and drove off towards Silver Lake Road. Do we have audio? No, ma'am. The system's visual only. Irene's jaw clenched. Pull his phone records from that time. I want to know who he was talking to. Within minutes, the analyst returned. He made one outgoing call at 10:52 p.m. to Elena Cross. The room went silent. He called her while he was at the gas station, Irene murmured, piecing it together. And told her Mara was gone. But she wasn't gone yet. The truth settled like lead. David hadn't been grieving his wife. He'd been staging her disappearance. Later that afternoon, Irene drove to the gas station herself. The air smelled of oil and pine. The night clerk, a teenager with sleepy eyes, confirmed what the footage couldn't. Yeah, I remember that guy. He paid cash. I asked if he was traveling far. He said, not far enough. Did you see anyone else in the car? She asked. The boy hesitated. I thought I saw someone under a blanket, but he told me it was a dog. Didn't look like a dog to me. Back at headquarters, Irene stared at the paused footage again. She felt a grim satisfaction, but also dread, because now she had to answer the question that haunted her from the start. If Mara didn't die in that cabin, where was she? She typed her report slowly, ending with one chilling note. Evidence suggests Mara Linton was alive when last seen in David Linton's vehicle. Destination unknown. Subject may still be in danger. Or already dead elsewhere. Her phone buzzed, a message from Forensics found something in the car's trunk liner. Blood matches. While the screen blurred in her hand, Irene rose, heart hammering. The puzzle was almost complete, but the picture it formed was darker than she imagined. She closed her laptop and whispered, he didn't just lie. He buried her story alive. Outside, thunder rolled over Silver Lake, and somewhere far from the city, a woman's face flickered briefly on another piece of unseen footage, one that would soon redefine the entire case. The marshland was silent except for the low hum of generators and the restless panting of the dogs. Mist clung to the surface like a veil, turning every shadow into a question mark. Detective Irene Shaw stood ankle-deep in mud, her flashlight slicing through the fog. The dogs had stopped moving. They circled one patch of ground, whining, then began to dig. A crime scene technician dropped to his knees beside them, scraping carefully until something pale surfaced. Not bone, but fabric. Bag it, Irene ordered. Her voice was steady, but her chest tightened. The fabric, a silk blouse once white, was soaked in brownish decay. A few inches deeper, the unmistakable curve of a human wrist appeared, tangled with reeds. One of the officers turned away, gagging softly. Irene crouched beside the exposed form, the metallic scent of death heavy in the damp air. Stop, she said quietly. Don't disturb her more than we have to. It took 4 hours to recover the body. What remained was fragile, bones held together by remnants of silk and memory. Around one finger was a thin gold wedding band, engraved faintly with 2 words. Forever, D. the marsh fell still. Even the wind seemed to stop. By noon, the forensics tent was up. A technician whispered, we got a partial DNA read. Initial match to Mara Linton. Irene closed her eyes. Confirm it. Hours later, the lab results arrived. Positive identification. Mara Linton. The weight of the words pressed down like a verdict. Irene stood motionless beside the coroner's van, watching as the body was loaded inside. For weeks, she had chased ghosts, grainy footage, burned remains, voices on tape. Now she had a body, and with it, the undeniable truth. At headquarters, David Linton sat under fluorescent lights, his wrists cuffed loosely on the table. His once polished demeanor had cracked. His eyes were hollow, unfocused. As Irene entered, he lifted his head, managing a weak smile. I heard you found her, he murmured. It must be a relief, Irene repeated, lowering the file onto the table. She was found face down in a marsh with your ring on her finger. You tell me how that's a relief. He blinked, slow and deliberate, then sank back into the chair. I loved her, he said almost tenderly. More than she ever understood. Is that what you told her before you killed her? David's expression hardened. You have no proof I did anything. Not yet, Irene said. But we're getting there. He exhaled sharply, eyes darting to the one-way mirror behind her. You people never get it, he muttered. She wasn't supposed to leave. She just wouldn't stop running. Then, as if remembering the role he was supposed to play, he slumped forward, shaking violently. I can't do this," he gasped, collapsing from the chair. The paramedic rushed in, checking his pulse. "Fainting spell," someone said. But Irene didn't move. She knew performance when she saw it. Later in the hallway, a young officer approached. "Ma'am, you need to see this. The autopsy report says Mara's time of death doesn't match the night she vanished." Irene stopped cold. "What do you mean?" "She was alive for at least 2 more days after that." The words struck like thunder. If Mara had lived beyond that night, someone had kept her alive long enough to make sure she would never speak again, and that someone wasn't ready to let the truth die with her. The courthouse overflowed with reporters, flashing cameras and whispers that carried like smoke. The murder of Mara Linton had become more than a case. It was entertainment. The nation watched as the man once dubbed the perfect husband walked in wearing a charcoal suit and an expression of quiet sorrow. David paused at the defense table, adjusting his cufflinks as though preparing for a photo shoot. His lawyer, a celebrity in her own right, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember," she murmured, "they don't want facts. They want a story." And David knew stories. Across the aisle sat Detective Irene Shaw, her notes meticulously organized, her jaw set. To her, this wasn't theater. It was closure. The trial opened with David's defense spinning a portrait of devotion, a husband desperate to save a troubled wife. They painted Mara as unstable, emotional, burdened by perfectionism and paranoia. She feared being abandoned, his lawyer said gently. She even told him she might disappear one day to teach him what love costs. David dabbed a tear, his timing flawless. Gasps rippled through the room. When it was the prosecution's turn, Irene watched the prosecutor lift a small black recorder from an evidence bag. The sound of the click echoed like a gunshot. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said, "this is the voice of Mara Linton." The courtroom went still. A moment later, her voice filled the speakers, trembling, intimate, unmistakably real. "He says he loves me, but every time I breathe without asking, he reminds me who owns the air." A hush fell over the room. Even the judge shifted uneasily. The tape continued, a collage of fear, confession, and resignation. Mara's words came between pauses, gasps, and muffled sobs. "If I disappear, it's because he made me." David's head bowed, his face hidden in his hands. To the cameras, it looked like grief, but Irene saw it differently. The way his jaw clenched, the flicker of rage behind the tears. During cross-examination, David's composure began to fracture. "You're twisting everything," he shouted at the prosecutor. "Those tapes were she was acting. She wanted to hurt me. Is that what she was doing when you dragged her into the marsh?" His lawyer jumped up. "Objection." But it was too late. The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Outside, protesters held signs. "Justice for Mara, silence isn't love. Truth never dies." The trial had become a symbol of every woman erased behind closed doors. Irene sat through every session, her expression unreadable. She'd seen too many men like David, polished, articulate, untouchable. But when the defense began introducing evidence suggesting a third party, Irene's instincts sparked again. They presented a photo, a shadowy figure near the cabin, the night of the fire. "There's no proof my client was alone," the defense argued. "Someone else could have killed Mara, maybe even the person she planned to meet." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. The narrative shifted. Doubt crept in. By the closing arguments, David had regained control of the audience. He spoke directly to the jury, voice trembling just enough to sound human. "I loved Mara," he said. "She was my life. If I failed her, it wasn't out of hate. It was because I couldn't let go. You call that murder. I call it love." When the verdict was read, the world seemed to hold its breath. Not guilty. Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed. David exhaled, shoulders sagging in relief, while Irene's pen snapped in her grip, outside. Reporters swarmed as David smiled faintly for the lenses. The tragic hero redeemed. But behind the courthouse, Detective Shaw's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. He wasn't the only one who loved her. She stared at the text, heart pounding. Somewhere in the shadows of the city, the real story wasn't over. The courtroom air was heavy with the scent of sweat, perfume, and quiet dread. Reporters whispered in the back row, their pens poised to capture every flicker of emotion. David Linton sat motionless, eyes fixed on the grain of the table before him. The verdict loomed, but the man who once commanded every room now seemed smaller, a shadow of his former self. Detective Irene Shaw watched from her seat, studying him the way a hunter studies a wounded predator. She'd seen men break before, but David's unraveling was different, almost rehearsed, as if he wanted to choreograph his own downfall. When the judge called for a recess, David requested to speak privately with his attorney. Minutes later, the lawyer emerged pale and shaken. "He wants to make a statement," she murmured to the court officer. The cameras were turned back on. David rose slowly, his movements deliberate, his gaze sweeping across the jurors. For the first time, the mask slipped. "I didn't mean for things to go that far," he began, voice trembling yet calculated. "It was a moment of madness. She was screaming, saying she'd leave me. Leave us." A murmur passed through the crowd. David swallowed hard, continuing, "You all think you know love. You think it's flowers, promises, and pretty pictures. But real love—" He paused, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "Real love is sacrifice. It's control. It's keeping someone safe, even from themselves." Irene's pulse quickened. This wasn't remorse. It was revelation. He looked toward the gallery, toward no one and everyone at once. "Mara wanted to destroy everything we built. Our image, our story. She said she was tired of pretending. But the world loved us. We were perfect. I couldn't let her take that away." He pressed a hand to his chest. "So I helped her sleep peacefully. She was leaving the story unfinished, and I couldn't bear an ending without her." The room fell silent. One of the jurors began to cry. Another turned away. The prosecutor stood, voice sharp with disbelief. "You're admitting you killed her?" David tilted his head. "Killed?" He gave a soft, humorless laugh. "No, I just made sure her part of the story ended beautifully." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The judge called for order, gavel striking wood, but the sound was swallowed by chaos. Reporters leapt to their feet, flashes erupted, and Irene rose slowly, every muscle tense. David didn't resist as officers approached. He simply stared at the mirror on the far wall, the one reflecting his own image back at him. For a moment he smiled faintly, whispering something only he could hear. Later, when Irene reviewed the court footage, she paused that frame, David gazing into his own reflection, lips forming three distinct words. It was mercy. That night, news channels replayed the confession endlessly, calling it the monster's monologue. But Irene wasn't celebrating. Something about his tone, the certainty in his eyes, made her stomach twist, because monsters like David never told the whole truth. And as she drove home, her phone buzzed again, another anonymous message. "You still haven't met the real monster." She pulled over, reading the text twice, her reflection flickering in the rearview mirror. Somewhere behind that calm glass, the story wasn't done. It was just beginning again. Autumn had returned, the same soft gray hue that once framed the Linton mansion the night everything fell apart. Detective Irene Shaw walked through the quiet cemetery, her boots crunching against the brittle leaves. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of rain and earth. She'd come alone. No cameras, no reporters, no questions. Just silence. She stopped before the small marble headstone marked Mara Linton, Forever D. Someone had etched the words deeper since the last time she'd visited. Irene brushed her fingers over the carving, wondering if it had been family or him. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small silver voice recorder, the same one that had sealed David's fate. It had been returned after the trial, logged as closed evidence, but she couldn't bring herself to destroy it. Inside, Mara's voice still lived, trembling. Brave and heartbreakingly real, she pressed play. "If I disappear," Mara's voice whispered through the static, "it's because he made me." Irene closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her like a ghost's final breath. For months, that voice had haunted her. In her sleep, in her dreams, even in the courtroom's silence. Now it felt like the last remnant of a woman who refused to vanish quietly. She set the recorder down at the base of the stone, beside a single white rose. "You spoke," she murmured. And they finally listened. The sky darkened, a drizzle beginning to fall. Irene turned to leave, and that's when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, you didn't stop him. You just slowed him down. Her pulse quickened. The number was untraceable, just like the last message she'd received the night of the verdict. She thought it had been a cruel prank, someone seeking attention from the infamous case. But now, months later, the chill that ran down her spine felt too familiar to ignore. She rushed back to her car, the rain pounding harder against her coat. Inside, she wiped the fog from the windshield and replayed the message thread. 2 texts, one before David's confession, one after his conviction. Both cryptic, both sent at moments only someone close to him would know. She drove straight to the precinct, her mind unraveling possibilities. When she arrived, an officer met her at the door. "Detective Shaw," he said, voice uneasy. "You should see this." He handed her a printed report, missing person, Anna Keller. She's 27. The photo showed a smiling woman with green eyes and a soft dimple. The name struck something deep within Irene's memory. She was one of David Linton's patients, the officer continued. Post-surgery recovery. She missed her last appointment 2 weeks ago. Her car was found abandoned outside the city limits this morning. Irene's breath caught. Any signs of struggle? Not yet. But her purse and phone were left on the passenger seat. Just like Mara's. The words felt like a knife twisting inside her. She'd spent months believing she'd closed the chapter on David's horrors. But monsters didn't stop, they multiplied. And sometimes they left disciples behind. She looked again at the missing woman's photo. There was something about her face. Not just resemblance, but familiarity. Then she saw it. The pendant around her neck. A small silver heart engraved with the letter D. Her stomach dropped. "Oh God," she whispered. He wasn't working alone. The officer frowned. "Ma'am?" But Irene was already moving, grabbing her keys. The cemetery was less than 10 minutes away. If the messages were coming from someone else, someone who still visited Mara's grave, then she might not be alone out there. As she reached the gates again, the rain had turned to mist. The grave looked undisturbed. The recorder, however, was gone. In its place lay a note folded neatly beneath the white rose. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. Only 3 words were written, in David's unmistakable handwriting. The story continues. Irene stood frozen, the paper soaking through her gloves. Somewhere the recorder clicked on. A faint voice whispering through the static. A new voice this time, softer, younger. He said I remind him of her. The wind carried the words away. But Irene heard them clearly, and in that moment, she understood. The voice that stayed wasn't Mara's anymore. It was the beginning of another woman's story.